Good morning. How are we doing? All right. I'm going to give you a little bit of a lesson in history to get us started. Ooh. First of all, just check this is working. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to call this talk Breaking New Ground, and I'm going to explain right at the very end why I've called it this, okay? But in the meantime, I want to introduce you to Edward Kimball. Anyone heard of Edward Kimball? Great, I can say anything I want to then. Edward Kimball was born in 1823, and he was a simple Sunday school teacher based in Boston in the US. We desperately need more people to serve in our kids' church. So I thought I'd start with a Sunday school teacher. You too could be like Edward Kimball, okay? He joined the Mount Vernon Congregational Church, served as a Sunday school teacher. His class was filled with young teenage boys, including one young boy who worked as a young clerk in a shoe business, a family shoe business. And during one of this clerk's first classes at Kimball's Sunday school, Kimball asked all of those that were there to turn in their Bibles to the book of John. Well, this young shoe clerk hadn't got a clue where the book of John was, so he opened the Bible at the beginning, and all the kids started to laugh at him. But Kimball saw this and handed the young shoe clerk his own Bible, already open at the right page. This young clerk was really impressed with Kimball's kindness, so he continued to attend Sunday school, and in 1855, Kimball visited this young lad at his own place of employment at Holton Shoe Store, a business that was owned by one of the clerk's uncles. And during a conversation that happened between the pair of them, this young, now 18-year-old, gave his life to Christ. That's what happens, Sunday school teachers. That's the way to go. This young lad's name was Dwight L. Moody. Some of you might have heard of Dwight L. Moody. He's been preached from the front here and in many, many churches around the world. Kimball shared the gospel with him, leading him to faith. Dwight L. Moody, the shoe store clerk, grew up to become one of the most famous and impactful evangelists of the 19th century. One of those, however, that was influenced by Dwight Moody, it doesn't end there, was a young man called J. Wilber Chapman. Here he is. And he experienced a conversion when he listened to Dwight D.L. Moody. And there was a spark, he said, there was a spark that called me into church ministry. Through the influence and meetings of D.L. Moody, Chapman went on to become a prominent Presbyterian pastor and evangelist. Okay? So he was born in 1858. Billy Sunday was born in 1862. He played professional basketball. I've got him here. Yep, here you go. He played professional basketball for 8 seasons in the National League. And on a Sunday afternoon in Chicago, around 1886, Billy Sunday and several of his teammates went off on the town on their day off. And at one street corner, they stopped to listen to a gospel preaching team. And that's where Billy Sunday, encountered Chapman and his preaching. And after getting more and more involved in Chapman's preaching, this basketball player, Billy Sunday, gave his life to Jesus and later became a prominent American evangelist in his own right. Billy Sunday, therefore, started preaching, and one young man in his very early 20s who was inspired by his teaching was a guy called Mordecai Ham. Anyone heard of Mordecai Ham? No, I can carry on saying anything I want to, can't I? All right then. Mordecai Ham was really impressed with the teaching of Billy Sunday, and so he gave his life to Christ and decided at the tender age of 24 in 1901 that he wanted to enter the Christian ministry for himself and become a pastor and a preacher. It wasn't long before Ham was leading meetings of his own, and as a result of that, he met a young boy called Billy. and he decided to spend time with Billy, and Billy was listening to Ham, and on one occasion, he was challenged by Ham's preaching from Romans 5 verse 8 in the King James Version, apparently, and there was a challenging moment for this young guy, Billy, who came forward, and Ham led him to Christ. We know that Billy as the American evangelist Billy Graham. Billy Graham went on to preach live to nearly 215 million people across more than 185 countries. I didn't even know there were 185 countries and territories. He held 417 evangelistic crusades spanning 6 continents over his decades-long career. Are we still with me? Yeah, you following this okay? In one of those events, it took place in Sheffield, UK, in June 1985. A young 15-year-old was present, and the preaching of Billy Graham significantly influenced that young 15-year-old's life. I was that young 15-year-old in Sheffield. Thank you very much, Edward Kimball, where it all began. It all got me thinking, what if Edward Kimball had not made the effort to head out to that young shoe clerk Moody's place of work back in 1855, hadn't pursued him with the gospel? Or what if that very successful basketball player, Billy Sunday, never went out to Chicago on that night out and never stopped to listen to that preacher on the street corner in 1886? What if? But it did happen. Divine appointments, perhaps. Time that was completely outside of my control, and yet I stand here today bearing in my own small part witness to, as it were, that cosmic consequence of those divine appointments, those divine moments in history that were, shall we say, for such a time as this. For such a time as this. Another young 15-year-old was in my youth ministry, or involved in a missional youth initiative that I was leading in Gloucestershire about 25 years ago, in about 2001, 2002. More than 20 years later, I arrive here in Pershore, and as you know, I start to take on a greater church leadership role, only to discover that 15-year-old that I knew, a young lad called James, was now the Baptist minister in our same town. I recall us reuniting with, I have to admit, with great surprise. I thought it was a bit of a toe rag back in the day. Oh, we're recording this, aren't we? Oops. And I remember saying to him, I wonder if God has intentionally brought us back together for such a time as this. And just 2 or 3 years later, we're employing his wife, Lydia, as our missional leader here, who has been enabling us to break new ground as we reach out to communities across the town, and more specifically across North Pershore, for such a time as this. As I've reflected on this recently, my mind has been drawn to a very interesting part of the Bible, from which I don't believe we preach very often. So if you've got a Bible handy, or you've got a Bible app on your phone, I'll pause to allow you to find it. I'm going to go to the book of Ecclesiastes. Took me a while to practice that before I could even say it properly. The book of Ecclesiastes, which is just after Psalms and Proverbs in the Old Testament of the Bible. So if you've got a copy of that, which is probably a digital copy, do have a look at it. I'm going to look at Ecclesiastes 3. I can hear the ruffle of all those Bibles right now being turned to the right page. Back in the day, hey? This might be a familiar passage for some of us. And here's what it has to say. I'm reading from the very beginning. Note, it has a lot to say about time. For such a time as this. A lot to say about time. The writer says this: there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. The writer goes on to say, what do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Now, curiously, I suspect that many of us here may well have been familiar with these verses from perhaps going to, of all things, funerals, because they're quite often verses that are captured at funerals where perhaps we're encouraged to reflect for a moment upon the life of a loved one. Some might argue that actually this is a bit of a gloomy picture that this writer, who is King Solomon, presents. It's certainly delivered by a man who'd made his fair share of gloomy reflections during a period of somewhat wayward living in his own life. He had indeed experienced much of the so-called futility of life and time without God. It's fair to say that the author, King Solomon, has certainly experienced a downward spiraling period of life, from which it's easy to understand why he would later go on in the same chapter to write these words. Just a few verses away in verse 19, he goes on to say, everything is meaningless. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. Again, we hear that at funerals, don't we? In fact, he uses the word meaningless 38 times in this small book. He's not saying that life is not without meaning, but the word here, meaningless, is synonymous with the word in our language that we would use for vapor or mist. Gone in a moment, disappears in a moment. That's what he's saying, that meaning can be hard to figure. There are highs, there are lows, there are great moments, there are disappointments. And as one pastor once put it, life is somewhat of a mystery, especially when you don't have God in the equation. Life can be pretty depressing and meaningless. I think, personally, we only have to watch, as I sometimes find myself doing, the 10 o'clock news at night, any day of the week, and we can easily find ourselves feeling a little bit this way, can't we? Solomon had abandoned God. He'd worshipped idols, and he'd led the people of Israel into idolatry. Not a good moment of time in the history of Israel. And it's from that low place that some of what we read here can be found. Solomon had experimented with lots of things, with alcohol, with women, with power, with money. But without God, he concluded, everything was meaningless. Listen to what one commentator had to say about this passage, or as he referred to it, a poem. He says this, we are born without having chosen our birth. We die without having chosen our death. We find ourselves simply in times of war or times of peace. We do not dictate which times we inhabit. The poem here, in so many ways, is revealing that human life unfolds according to a pattern that we did not design and we cannot control. The teacher Solomon then makes a profound observation in verse 11. He says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Some things are truly beautiful, yet heartbreakingly brief, aren't they? And they cause us to long for more. And some things, let's face it, are truly miserable and feel like they last forever. But in the grand scheme of things, they will be completely gone and forgotten. Both the misery of life and the beauty of life will cause us to long for more. And God, Solomon says, has set eternity in the human heart. Time is clearly the most repeated word in this poem of Solomon's. How strange it is, isn't it, to be time-bound, terribly limited creatures as we are, who feel the pull of eternity, a longing for the kind of life that will never die. But just as we've sang today, we all sense there must be more to life than this. Our brief span of life between birth and death, we long for real permanence. Our works are fleeting, but God's are permanent. Our seasons are fleeting. His purposes stand firm. And so perhaps our right response to that reality surely is to worship and fear God. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3 reminds us that life and time is often uncontrollable and confusing, painfully short, and yet shot with beauty and purpose and with the fingerprints of God. I love that phrase. Time is shot with the fingerprints of God. Look at the journey here again from Kimball, Moody, Chapman, Sunday, Ham, Graham, Andrews. Is there something of the fingerprints of God that we can see here? While we cannot see the whole tapestry, we know the one who is weaving it. So because of that, we can live with humility and hope in every season of time, whether it's good or bad under the sun. God is in control. He brings us together even today for such a time as this. So, okay, you might ask, well done, Scott, what's the point? The poem of Ecclesiastes conveys a message that we might misconstrue, that life is just merely futile. We don't control time, we don't control the issues of our day. So what do? So often we cannot control the circumstances we find ourselves in, can we? It's not our pattern. We don't control the moments. But we have that innate sense that there must be more to life than this. We feel eternity. We capture a glimpse of it, don't we? Now, this could lead to frustration and despair, or we can choose to pursue humility and gratitude. We're free to receive each moment as a gift from God. Does each moment feel like that? Trusting, as the New Testament writers remind us, that he who has begun a good work in us will complete it. That he who is in us is greater than he that is in the world. That every good and perfect gift comes from our Father of lights. But how often do I pause and examine the life today, in this moment of time that we're living? The places within which God has located us at this time, today. The circumstances that occupy our very existence today. In that very rich picture of life's conundrums that we've just read, where are we located today? You and I. Where are we located today? Where has God placed us at such a time as this? Now, I have to confess, I am not a natural reflector. Perhaps I should be. Where do we go amidst the busyness of life to pause? As the psalmist says, to be still, and know that I'm God. Is the world noise too deafening? Do we need to find in a moment or a time such as now the space to dial down the world noise, even if only for minutes, and seek, truly seek God? Not just with our minds, with our intellect, with our thinking, but deeper than that. Allowing his very presence to meet us deeper in our souls. Where do we find the time for that, guys? At the very location where we hold our deepest sense of identity. Who we are, what we are, how we are. For me, I wrote this a few days ago. But in the last 2 days, there's been for me quite a significant time to reflect and pause. A time out of my normal routine. I had a family wedding to go to 2 days ago on Friday. And in the midst, you know what it's like in weddings, especially when you haven't got anything to do, you just have to be there. There's lots of hanging around, isn't there? And in that space of hanging around, I just kind of looked around. Little Martha, our little girl. My grown-up kids. Lois, my eldest daughter, with my granddaughter. Flipping heck, am I that old? My mum running around like a headless chicken, like she always has done. My sister and her 5 boys and their partners. including the one that was just about to get married. Pause and reflect on the life lived, the incidents, the moments in time, the good points, the not good points, the highs and the lows. And then yesterday, Martha and Rachel and I decided in a moment of crazy foolishness to go for a 4-mile walk up and up to the top of Snowdon. And by about 2:30 in the afternoon, we joined the many crowds at the top of that small mountain, waiting forever to take the final 15 steps to get to touch the actual stone at the top. Martha insisting that we had to do it, so we joined the queue. And then 45 minutes or so of reflecting in that space, time just stood still. And it was a beautiful, beautiful day. I've been up Snowdon many times, but yesterday was a beautiful day. And we could see the whole of creation all around us, the mountain ranges, the sea. We could see across into Anglesey, the Great Orme, all sorts of beautiful things. The wind blowing in our faces gently, the heat of the sun. Oh, it was a good moment. But to be honest, where do I normally take myself to pause from that routine? If I'm honest, probably it's just to my back garden. Sometimes I need to be utterly alone with God. I stop, I listen, I breathe slowly. As the speakers of Lectio 365 often pray at the beginning of that morning Bible verse, I invite God to recenter my scattered senses. Don't we need a bit of that? To be still. And it's sometimes in those moments where I find I can sometimes proclaim, yes, it is well with my soul. In that moment, it is well with my soul. Despite the highs, the lows, the ups, the downs, the difficulties, the challenges. In 1876, Horatio Spafford wrote a very well-known hymn in which it's written, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." Now, curiously, that author, Spafford, had endured great pain at the death of his own son, and he'd experienced the Great Fire of Chicago in 1871, which ruined him financially. But despite that, he could pen those words and conclude, it is whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. So I entitled this talk, Breaking New Ground, and you'd be forgiven for looking at such a title and saying, Scott, it's August, for Pete's sake. It's time for a rest, not breaking new ground, please. Well, we do need more Sunday school teachers. Thank you, Edward Kimball. But in one sense, you're right. This is not the time for recruiting and for rotas. In fact, it's a time where we dial down the activities, the rotas, the schedules, the midweek Zoom prayer meetings, life groups, and all that other stuff of church activity. This should be a time, remember, a time for all things, where we can take a step away from such busyness. Slow down. Pause to be still. Perhaps it's time for you to reflect, as I've been trying to do, to dial down the world noise. The world noise. Is this not the place where we can invite God to break new ground in our lives when we do that? Where we can be still and know God. Come, Lord, break in even deeper. I want to rest in your presence. I invite you, Lord, reveal, illuminate my very soul. Shine your light into the very core of who I am. As God revealed in the book of Revelation, he says this, listen, church, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will eat with him and he with me or she with me. It's an invitation for intimacy, an invitation to welcome our Redeemer King, to come deep into the core of our lives. No. Deeper. Wasn't it Solomon who wrote in those verses from verse 12, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. And at that wedding reception, that's what I did. This is the gift of God. And ultimately, what happens when we invite God to break new ground as he invades our very being? Verse 7, he sets eternity in our heart. Do we need a bit of that? Bringing purpose out of meaningless, hope out of despair, and an eternal perspective of a much, much better life to come. Amen? Would you stand with me? I'm going to ask Aid and Elle if we can sing again that song. Let's reflect on the words. There must be more than this.